My name is Natalie Christensen, and I'm a first-year film student in the School of Film and Television. When people ask me where I got my start in creating films and other art, I don't usually talk about my own trials or how these things affect the work I create. So I wanted to take this time to talk about the reasons I do what I do that aren't so easy to talk about. But I sort of wanted to preface everything by saying that I grew up in Richmond, Virginia, and I had a wonderful childhood. I grew up running through forests, building tree houses, swimming in the river. So it kind of sounds like I grew up in like a 70s like cheesy movie. But as with any life, there were moments that challenged me and transformed me into who I am today as I grew up. And when I was told what the prompt for the speech was, it really took me back to 9th grade, because that was really a time in my life where I felt really voiceless. I was a really anxious and depressed person when I was 14. I had obsessive compulsive disorder, and dealing with that while just starting high school was really challenging for me, because I really wanted to make new friends at my new school, but I found it really hard to maintain stability day to day. There were some days where I was so anxious that I would just lay in the nurse's office during class. And there was this one class that I had that year that I remember really vividly. It was my biology class, and it was really disorganized and unfocused. Kids would just walk around or yell at the teacher, and it was a huge class, way bigger than any class in high school should ever be. And I had a few friends in the class, and there was this one guy who sat in front of me, and we would kind of make fun of each other, go back and forth. It was kind of fun. It was like the nature of our relationship. We would just mess with each other. And this one day for class, we had a substitute teacher. And as you can imagine, with a class that was already this disorganized, that day we were just kind of walking around, hanging out, doing nothing. And me and the guy who sat in front of me were going back and forth and like making fun of each other as usual, messing with each other. And I walked to the back of the classroom to get something out of my backpack, and I turned around, and he came up behind me and he forcefully touched me in an inappropriate place. And so, it was really hurtful, like I was really humiliated right when it happened. And it happened in front of everyone, So I just felt really like frozen. I didn't know what to do. And my friends in my class told me that I shouldn't report it to the school because they had overheard him threatening me for later after it happened. And I decided to go to my guidance counselor anyway after it happened that day, and I explained to her what had happened to me. And she told me that there wasn't really much that the school could do, but that it was up to me whether I wanted to report it or not. And so I decided not to report it because I felt like it wasn't bad enough to report it, and I also just felt like I didn't want to make things worse because of the threat. So I didn't report it, and one of the things that really stood out to me though about that day was that none of my friends that were in the class when it happened did anything about it. They didn't tell him to leave me alone, and they didn't offer to walk me to my next class. And that really hurt me. And even if they didn't know me at all in that class, their silence really spoke volumes to me. And there's this MLK quote I saw when I was walking through the halls of LMU the other day, and it said that in the end, we remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. And I feel like that's really something we should all consider, and not just the silence of our friends, but the silence of those who may not even know us, but that just decide that issues aren't their problem, or the problem of anyone they know. And growing up in Richmond, as someone who's half Asian, I never really felt like there was a group that I totally identified with ethnically. But something that I realized as I grew up was that just because I don't have the lived experience of someone doesn't mean that I can't empathize with them. It doesn't mean I can't take action on issues that affect them. I felt like if something needed to be made and it hadn't been made, then I should do it. So last year, my senior year in high school, I created a film about these monuments on Monument Avenue in Richmond. And on Monument Avenue, there are Confederate monuments, and there's a monument to Arthur Ashe at the end of the avenue. And for the film, I interviewed the sculptor of the Arthur Ashe Monument, Paul Pasquale, as well as the civil rights activist and scholar Anna Edwards, who's based out of Richmond. And I'm really proud of the way that the documentary was received by Richmond. It won first place at the Oliver Whitehouse Social Justice Competition, and it screened at the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts, so I was really proud of that. And one thing that came up in both interviews for the film was this idea of having an open facilitated dialogue about the monuments. So I held facilitation at my high school, Godwin, about the monuments, and I specifically remember this one man who attended. He was an older white man, and when we opened up the dialogue to everyone, he talked about how this was the first time and that he really started challenging his beliefs and how he wanted to learn more and become better. And this is someone who likely grew up in a time in Richmond where lost cause rhetoric was just a part of textbooks. And he's someone who, before challenging his beliefs, I probably would have considered him my enemy, right? So it really compelled me to want to create more films like that one, because I realized that film can change the way that someone thinks. And I think that's really powerful. I think that's really fun. So now I go to LMU, a film school I chose because of the way that it values justice. And I've been working in ethnic intercultural services, creating events about issues that affect the Asian community. And I've also been working as an intercultural facilitator, which has taught me more than I could have imagined about new perspectives, conscious communication, and effective ways to take action on issues. So these are really exciting times for me. And one thing I've learned throughout my growth as an artist and an activist is that all of these issues are so intersectional. Every single one affects the other one, and all of these issues pertain to every single one of us. Sexism is an issue that doesn't just affect women, it affects men too. Institutionalized racism affects every single person of every ethnicity in some way. So basically these things are everyone's problem. I know that the guy who hurt me in 9th grade must have been hurting too. And I don't know for sure, and it was important for me to realize that what happened was about him and the system that he grew up in, and not just about me. I don't know for sure, but maybe he was in pain, maybe he was scared. And I'm not saying there's an excuse for what he did, but humanizing him has helped me process this whole thing. He's not a monster because I feel like that gives him more power over me. He's a human being and he did something wrong, but there's more to it than him just being a bad person, because I feel like people aren't black and white like that. I wanted to speak about what happened to me because I feel like at that time in my life, not only did I need help, a voice, and compassion, but I think he did too. I used to look back in my life and I would see a series of enemies and friends, bigots and progressives. But I've just sort of come to realize that everyone is connected to me and no one is separate from me. When I don't separate his humanity from mine, it gives me peace. Someone who has a different identity than me is still connected to me, and that's not something I can change. And now that I know what it feels like to be voiceless, I know that if I don't use my voice to empower the voice of others, I lose my voice again, because my voice values justice. So I ask you to question today what your voice values. Does your voice value the issues that you perceive to be only those of yours and your friends, or does your voice value the issues which harm your so-called enemies too? Because those who are lacking in love are those who need it the most, and those are the people that I want to reach more than anything.
Wow.